Psychology, and here we go. So this is what we're going to call lesson 7. I'm going to talk about social perception and attribution, and we're going to give you, I hope, a homework assignment you enjoy. It's a little stands out as a little different than the ones we've done in class, so we'll get to that as we near the end of the lecture. So let's talk social perception, let's talk attribution, and I've said before that maybe social psychology believes that it owns organizational psychology, that organizational psychology is actually a subset of social psychology. I don't want to make too strong a case for that, but really what we're going to see now is some straight-up social psychology as it applies in an organizational context. So you can look at it that way if you wish, right? So hopefully Annika will help us through this. First, I want to talk about social perception versus social perception, and maybe you've had a class in the psychology department in perception, sensation and perception, and you see that it's kind of a straight-up biomechanical process, and the recognition and processing of a stimuli is the perceptual part. So the sensation is the initial part, perception is making sense of it, right? It's the processing of it. If we, perceive a computer, we perceive this controller, perceive a table, perceive a rock, it's kind of a one-way street, right? But the interesting thing is with social perception is when we perceive someone in a social setting, they perceive us back. And it's then this shared perception and this perception that goes back and forth that makes it more complicated, right, Annika? So right now I'm going to perceive Annika. She doesn't want to look at me, right? But she's perceiving me. She's at least listening to me. So I'm perceiving Annika, but Annika's perceiving me. But then I'm perceiving Annika perceiving me. And Annika's perceiving me, perceiving her, perceiving me. And so you can see that the layers of complexity become increasingly difficult to untangle. And we live in this world of this perceptual process, the social perception of perceiving others and having them perceive us back. So it's a little different than straight up perception, right? But let's talk conscious perception. I don't even want to get into conscious versus non-conscious perception, whole nother issue. But conscious perception, and I love this diagram, I love this illustration, so you may have seen it in another class that I've taught. Or if you take another class with me, don't be surprised if you see it again. I'm going to start here with the wheel, and what we have here is goals, motivation, and emotion. So this can represent our current state, our emotional state, our goal state, and our motivational state. And based on our goals, our motivation, our emotion, then it really is going to direct our attention to select certain aspects of the environment that are consistent with our goals or consistent with our motivation and or consistent with our emotions. So that's the selective attention and comprehension. The way we understand things is often in terms of what are our goals. Is it an opportunity? Is it not an opportunity? And then that might change our perception of what we're attending to. So selective attention, and think about the importance of this. William James, way back, 1890, said the world presents itself as this booming, buzzing confusion. And it's the process of selective attention that allows us to pull out aspects of this multitude of stimuli to the stimuli that we may need as guided, again, by our goals, motivation, and emotion. Here's the deal, though. As we prepare the percepts, if you will, the products of perception, as we prepare them, right, for working memory, then what we're doing is we're encoding, we're simplifying, or we may be elaborating, depending on the nature of the stimuli. So this gets it ready for memory. And memory is that strange box that says storage and retrieval, and who knows how the hell that works, right? Perceptual people are beginning to understand that, but only in a limited degree. Now, what we pull out of memory, though, affects our cognitive output. That is our thoughts, the content of working memory at that moment in time, and the related behaviors that we demonstrate in regard to this. Now, the output, though, what we think, what we've remembered, and then what we think, and how it affects our behavior, then goes on to affect our goals, motivation, and emotion. So really this wheel is the story of us, and it's the story of us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year throughout our life, as long as we are conscious at that point in time. So, bottom line, what I'm stressing here is that understanding what we want to get out of a situation or what we expect to get out of a person, right, has an effect on how we perceive our world and perceive our interaction with them. So it's not that there's a single truth really in this regard. What we're talking about then is multiple possibilities from which we select. Now, the attention phase, and I want to talk about a couple specific points on the wheel. What are we more likely to pay attention to? What is more likely to be salient to us, if we want to use the word? And we have a bias for things that are new. So novel stimuli attract our attention because we need to process them so that we can learn from them. Hi, Electron. How rare of you to make an appearance with us, right? And then brighter moving stimuli. And you can see where this might be adaptive, especially in terms of moving stimuli. Why are we kind of hardwired then to notice moving stimuli? Well, you know, if we go back 40, 50, 100,000 years, right, moving stimuli really presented either an opportunity or a threat. It could eat us or we could eat it, and it really is that simple. So things that, you know, demonstrate movement get a priority processing, if you will. Things that are unusual dispositionally or situationally. So as we learn and as we remember and we build schemas to organize our knowledge, once we find things that are anti-schematic, that don't really fit with an existing schema, then we take notice. So if you're used to, let's say, your boss who's extremely kind and always helpful and always supportive, and then your boss on a particular day, you say something and they snap at you rather ferociously, you go, whoa, what the hell's going on there? Because that's not like them at all. So we stand up and take notice because for them it was unusual dispositionally, right? Or if you go to a movie theater and you're sitting there waiting for the movie to come on, and you're watching people walk in, and all of a sudden this one guy walks in, right? And instead of sitting down, he stands up on a seat and he throws his popcorn in the air and he yells, "I love movies!" And you go, boy, that is not appropriate movie theater behavior. So you notice that it stands out situationally. Notice, it might be something he does all the time, so it's not unusual dispositionally for him, but in the context of the situation, you go, that's frickin' nuts, right? And maybe you look to move further away. Things that are extreme tend to get our attention, right? So we might not notice the day-to-day features of our environment, but problems that crop up, right, gain everybody's attention. Also, this could be extreme in terms of physical attributes. If you go to a party and someone is 7'2" tall, you can bet everyone in the room is going to notice them and they're going to stand out because of their extremity. Okay? Things that are visually dominant, and figure and ground then become part of the idea here. Hopefully you notice the screen more than you notice me, because the screen should be visually dominant, right? And I should be secondary to it and often fade in and out of screen. But on the other hand, I'm moving, so then that might give me an attentional leg up. Hard to know, right? Hard to say. Now, encoding, simplification, next step on the wheel. This is our schemas. So for missing information, our past history in a situation, our knowledge of a situation, our schemas might help us fill in the blanks or make it not necessary to notice every frickin' detail because we already know what those details are based on our memory and schema. Right? Now, encoding can be affected by recent stimuli, feelings, or needs. So again, the goals, motivation, etc. has an effect on how we encode. I mean, I might really, if I'm doing a road trip, a couple things are going to happen. If I'm doing a road trip and I'm hungry, then I'm more likely to notice places to eat as I'm driving along. Whereas if I'm on the road trip and I see that my gas gauge goes to E or approaching it, I'm more likely to notice gas stations, if you will. And I'm going to maybe demonstrate a greater level of appreciation. Oh my God, finally a place where I can eat, right? So what would normally just be a place where I could eat now has a more favored status driven by my hunger in the moment, right? So if you're Johnny on the spot as an employee, and you come at that moment in time when your boss is perplexed or having an issue, and you come to at that moment and fix the situation, right, or offer aid, then you're more likely, right, to be noticed, and that's more likely to be encoded more powerfully, that experience, because someone needed the help at that point in time. Whereas if you come and help, but they didn't really need the help, but they say, yeah, you can help because they just want to do the, the kind thing, then it's going to be encoded differently. Now, chronic attitudes have the ability to encode behavior, and this is where prejudice and stereotyping really gain some ground as it affects our perceptions and our behaviors. That is, chronic attitudes can affect the way we perceive a behavior as being typical, as being unusual, as being more helpful, as being less helpful. And if you want more on this, you probably really should take it anyway, is the Stereotyping and Prejudice class here at Ohio State. To see, it's a great way to understand how chronic attitudes affect us. And often those chronic attitudes may in fact be out of awareness, and we're not even conscious that they are affecting us in any given time. Now, memory is constructive. Well, we know the memory process is not a file drawer. We know it's not a video camera that is allowing us to roll back tapes, etc. They had those things way back in the day, just in case you didn't know that. All right, so memory is constructive. That memory has the ability to add information that should be there but wasn't there, but we believe belongs there. And subtle retrieval cues can affect what is recalled, what memory reconstructs, right? So context matters when we remember, because the current context shapes the way we remember. Okay? Now, the cognitive behavioral output, the last part of that wheel, right, what we're talking about is far more complex than anyone could imagine, right? That which starts the process, the antecedents, take place out of awareness for the most part. Remember, James said blooming, buzzing confusion. Well, non-consciously, we monitor our world relatively effectively. But the non-conscious is very selective on what it presents to the conscious mind. So the non-conscious often acts as a huge filter that's driven by our expectations, by our chronic attitudes. So much of what we encounter in the day, most of what we encounter in the day, we don't actually consciously process. The non-conscious has already diverted our attention away from it because the non-conscious has decided it's unnecessary, that it's not useful to our goals, it's not consistent with our chronic attitudes, what have you. So all these processes are largely taking place. Those antecedents, that which gets the ball rolling, right, usually take place out of awareness. So, stereotypes are one of these processes. Stereotypes are person schemas. So when I was talking about schemas previously, stereotypes are a subset of that. And these stereotypes are mental representations of social categories, right? And they contain a mix of abstract knowledge, that's the information that we've gathered through our life experience, and along with a group of exemplars or exemplars of group members. So if you've worked in retail, and I know many of us have, right, it may be on the basis of someone's appearance or the first few words they say that we generate a certain customer stereotype. And notice customer stereotypes run the range, and stereotypes, we can have favorable customers, we can have unfavorable customers, but we have stories that we can tell about those customers. If you're a server, and I know many of you are working as servers or used to work as a server, when you walk up to a table, do you have an impression of how your interaction is going to go based on who's sitting there? Is it a family? Is it a couple women out together, right? Is it a couple businessmen out together? What is it? And then you form a stereotype on how they might behave, right? Now, these can be valence independent. That is, the stereotype can be positive or negative, and I hope I've described both, right? So a stereotype isn't necessarily a bad thing. We can stereotype people favorably. But notice in the workplace, if your boss has a stereotype that these people work harder than those people, right? That those stereotypes, one is positive, one is negative, stereotypes valence independent. and they can be accuracy independent. There's no a stereotype can be highly inaccurate, or stereotypes can be relatively accurate given the context. And what we know about stereotypes is they can lead to discrimination or favoritism. Right? So, stereotypes in organizations. Let's move it more into an organizational conversation than a social psychology. Oh my God, these guys are going crazy. Terrence is chasing Emily. Terrence, what are you doing, buddy? Thank you for that. Okay. Now Emily's going to go after him. Okay, there you go. We're having all kinds of fun here. Rainy day, right? And these guys are just berserk today for whatever reason. Now Emily and Electron are going to go at it, or not. We'll see. And Annika, meanwhile, is just going to sleep through all of it. So she's happy because she's robbed this spot. You know, Penelope's usually here, so Annika's just enjoying herself. Stereotypes create, expand, and or diminish expectations. Okay? So when we hold stereotypes of people, it affects our expectations of those people. And that means that we may, on the basis of stereotypes, give certain types of people greater opportunity, right? May treat them more as the go-tos in our organization. And less important assignments might be handed to people that we stereotype more negatively or stereotype as less competent, right? And certain stereotype models, competence is one dimension, right? The central to the Fisk model as among other models. Expectations shape what we pay attention to and what we remember. So if people operate in a way that's not expected, it often stands out, right? And often we might not get credit for a good, consistent performance because it was expected of us. And the way it would become noticed to a greater extent is if we failed to meet the expectation. Stereotypes tend to rob the stereotype target of their individuality. And if I believe that I'm being stereotyped and my bosses just look at me as like, you know, a token minority or a token woman, then it robs me of opportunities for the most part, and also then diminishes my sense of self. That is, why should I put out the extra effort if it's simply going to be denied that I did so on the basis of my category membership, right? Stereotypes interfere with diversity efforts and understanding. And note that we talked a lot about diversity previously, and stereotypes at the heart of robbing us of our individuality within this context. Stereotypes encourage groupthink, right? And so that type of decision making. Oh, you know those people. Oh, the best approach to this. Oh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Stereotypes impede creativity because we're not looking at individuality. We're not looking at nuances. Okay? Stereotypes tend to rely on weak, non-existing evidence. And this is what Allport in his book on prejudice, right, had written. And he talked about the kernel of truth. And it's true. In Southern California, you know, when I lived in Los Angeles, and then when I went to visit my mom, I would go to Home Depot so I could get some parts, because I could never fix whichever she needed fixed without a trip to Home Depot. You guys, come on, stop fighting. And so I would always have to go to Home Depot. And what do you see in Southern California outside Home Depot? You see Hispanics. And Hispanics standing out there looking for day labor. So if I buy some stuff, right, I want to build a wall or whatever, and I buy the materials to put up this fence or buy this wall, there's some Hispanic guys sitting out there, you know, in the parking lot and hoping to be hired as day laborers, right? So if I then look at, well, if you need labor done around your home, Hispanics are the group to go to. Well, I mean, there is a kernel of truth, but, you know, the kernel of truth is about this big, and the exceptions to the kernel of truth are about that big. And stereotypes can create anxiety in targets, and you've probably learned about stereotype threat. That is, if I am a stereotype member, for example, when my boss Pete said, would you like to go to the coast, when I was working at the paper mill, and I was an hourly worker, a union member, so it was strange, but Pete came to me and he said, would you like to go to this total quality train the trainer session? And I'm like, I don't know, Pete. can you tell me any more about it? And he said, well, it's 5 days at the Oregon coast at this hotel. And I'm like saying, you mean you want me to leave my packaging machinery here, work in the graveyard shift, to go to the Oregon coast and stay in a hotel and hang out with some people? And it's like, yeah, duh, I think I'll go. But what was strange is when I got there, there was about 20 of us who were going to be trained as trainers for this total quality transformation of Boise Cascade. And the idea was we would learn a 2-day, it was a 20-hour, 2 10-hour day trainings, right? And learn how to deliver this training to people within the organization. So it's this model of transmitting the knowledge. You train the trainers, right? And you can magnify the impact of a training this way by having more trainers. But the weird thing is, when I got there and we went through the introductions, everyone's introducing themselves. Well, I'm Vice President of Sales for the West Coast. I'm, managing supervisor of the warehouses, etc. And everyone's going down the list, and it's like, these are all salaried managers and vice president. And then it gets to me, and I said, I'm a packaging line operator at Salem Converting. And I'm like, holy shit. I am the only union member here. They have tremendous anti-union stereotypes. And it's like, the reason I bring this up and laugh, it's the first time in my life that I ever felt I was representing my group. That is my union brothers and sisters. The rest of my life as a white male, I've never had to represent anyone. I was allowed to be an individual. This is the first time in my life, though, that I was placed under potential stereotype threat. That is, if I make a fool of myself, it's going to reflect on all my union brothers and sisters. So it's this additional burden, right, that minorities, women, minorities often feel in an organization, especially when they're kind of some of the first people of their type in the organization. They carry this extra burden of feeling that they represent their group. Right? So all of these are possible as a result of stereotypes in the organization. And you can see where often people have to work like doubly hard to kind of demonstrate that the stereotypes are inaccurate. Okay. Let's talk about some perceptual errors. But let's break here and let's go to part 2.